All right, let's just dive right into this explainer. Over the next 7 minutes or so, we're going to build what I call a wholesome understanding of a topic that is honestly incredibly pervasive, but often deeply misunderstood. We are talking about the lasting, lifelong consequences of body shaming. We'll be tracing how a single, seemingly fleeting, hurtful comment zooms out to systemically alter a person's entire lifespan. Because, you see, this isn't just about hurt feelings. It's actually about how the human brain literally wires itself for survival in a world that is constantly evaluating the body. Now, the absolutely crucial point we need to grasp right out of the gate is this. Body shaming sticks when a single social message becomes an internal rule. It doesn't just fade into the past as a bad memory. No, it's the exact moment a deeply ingrained, completely invisible rule takes root in a person's mind. Once a message like, my body is a problem, or my safety depends on looking a certain way, really takes hold, the person might completely stop hearing that original sentence. But the catch is, they keep living completely inside the belief that it created. Think of it kind of like a mark left in wet cement, or maybe a bent gold bracelet. The comment lands exactly once, but if it hits when someone's identity is still forming and when social approval really matters, it hardens permanently. Just like that bent bracelet, the damage might look incredibly small from a distance, but once the curve changes, it fundamentally warps how every single future compliment, mirror, or opportunity fits. Let's move into Section 1. Harm becomes a pattern, the mind's prediction system. So the irreducible truth here is that our brains literally learn from repetition. If you've been shamed repeatedly, your brain actually starts to act exactly like a broken smoke alarm. At first, it warns you about an actual fire, but later, it just screams at burnt toast. Because it has been trained by repeated danger, you start scanning for criticism everywhere just to protect yourself. A completely neutral look suddenly feels disapproving. A slight pause in conversation, that feels like harsh judgment. The body becomes a permanent alarm zone. Now, what's super interesting to note is that a lot of these common actions, things like avoiding photos, hiding in group settings, choosing baggy clothes, or over-exercising to silence anxiety, they aren't just random personal preferences. They are survival strategies. They are designed to manage perception instead of living freely. When that internal alarm is constantly ringing, behavior changes way before conscious beliefs do. The person literally stops asking, what do I want? And just starts asking, how do I avoid being seen badly? Just imagine carrying a tray of boiling hot tea right through the middle of a packed, crowded room. You definitely aren't enjoying the music, or the people, or the party. Literally, all of your energy goes to not spilling. And that is exactly what body shame does to the mind. Imagine spending your entire cognitive load just trying not to be exposed, leaving absolutely zero energy for creativity, joy, ease, or, taking a risk. You become completely organized around prevention. Which brings us to Section 2, a project, not a home, the body under surveillance. Consider for a second the fundamental difference between living in a home versus working on a project. Home mode is lived in, it's relaxed, it's a place of actual peace. A project, on the other hand, is constantly inspected, improved, and corrected, like a house with a constantly leaking roof. If your body becomes a project with a leaking roof, you live in endless maintenance mode. Belonging feels entirely conditional. You just keep postponing peace until you are finally acceptable. But the real trap is that the project never, ever fully finishes. And, this creates a completely false sense of control. It's exactly like holding a heavy door shut against a really strong wind. Early shame teaches you to hold that door shut with strict, exhausting discipline. And on the surface, it might look like incredible confidence or self-improvement, but the moment life gets messy, whether through stress or illness or just normal aging, the wind rushes right back in. The person feels betrayed by their own body, when in fact, the real enemy was the belief that their worth required constant surveillance in the first place. All right, let's look at Section 3, where the damage appears, mapping the spread. We can actually map out what is arguably the quietest yet most damaging effect of this entire system. The body starts carrying stress it was never meant to hold. Look at how perfectly ordinary experiences get translated into severe self-criticism. Gaining weight during stress suddenly becomes, I failed. Getting tired becomes, I'm weak. Normal bodily needs completely stop feeling neutral and become these highly morally loaded tests of worth. The person doesn't just ask what their body needs anymore. They ask, what does this say about me? Because the body is now viewed as a total liability, just being visible feels way too expensive. So we see women slowly shrink their lives down, one avoided opportunity at a time. And this is honestly one of the most overlooked consequences, because it doesn't always look like an obvious body image issue. It looks like avoiding leadership roles, dodging public speaking, or hesitating when it comes to career networking. They've learned that being seen is dangerous, so they naturally shrink their exposure. And that brings us to a really tragic paradigm shift. Behaviors that look perfectly disciplined or put together to the rest of the world are actually driven by absolute terror on the inside. Care asks the question, what supports my well-being? But surveillance asks, how do I avoid being judged? The actions themselves might look completely identical to an outsider, but the inner logic is miles apart. One expands your life, and the other contracts it into a rigid system of fear management. Let's shift to Section 4, the self-renewing loop, a systemic, lifelong trap. So, we have this 6-step loop, and it literally traps a person into thinking, wow, maybe they were right about me. Let's walk through how this happens. First, a person is judged. Second, she naturally begins to monitor herself. Third, that constant monitoring spikes her anxiety. Fourth, that anxiety changes her behavior. Fifth, this leads to restriction or awkwardness. And finally, step 6, those effects are tragically misread as evidence of a fundamental flaw. In reality, they're just witnessing the exhausting aftermath of their own survival adaptation. Notice how this exact same pattern just echoes over the entire timeline of a person's life. The shame didn't just magically go away, it simply lay dormant. In childhood, we see it as withdrawal. By adulthood, it morphs into career hesitation and perfectionism. And later in life, it shows up as the fear of aging. It essentially just waits for a new life stage, a new moment where the body is up for evaluation to reactivate that exact same old feeling of being under inspection. Finally, we arrive at Section 5, a new way of seeing, the wholesome understanding. To wrap up our 7-minute explainer today, I really want to leave you with a powerful question to think about. When you observe these behaviors, will you ask what is wrong with her? Or will you ask what happened to shape this response? By finally seeing body shaming as a lifelong system of conditioning rather than just a fleeting insult, we can actually start to dismantle these invisible rules. We can learn to spot the vital difference between self-care and self-surveillance. It's not a flaw, it's a profound adaptation to repeated social injury. So the next time you see these behaviors, ask yourself that second question. I promise you, it changes how you read human behavior entirely.